All right, thank you everyone for attending tonight's panel. Tonight is the first event in Becoming, which we hope to be an ongoing partnership between IGDA Seattle and Diversity Collective to highlight diverse leaders from throughout the video game industry. IGDA Seattle is a chapter of the International Game Developers Association, which is a professional association and global network of game developers with a mission of empowering game developers around the world to achieve fulfilling and sustainable careers. Diversity Collective is a community within Seattle Indies with the mission of supporting diversity and inclusion for minorities in game development. We have the opportunity tonight to learn from 5 experienced and diverse executive leaders. Each and every one of them is eager to share their story with you. As a heads up, Seattle Indies and the law firm of Premack Rogers are sponsoring a $500 donation in honor of this evening's panelists. The panelists have nominated these 5 organizations, and you will have the opportunity to vote on which one of them will receive the donation as the evening progresses. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us, and also thank you to IGDA for re-hosting tonight's event. I hope that you will find tonight's panel both educational and encouraging as you pursue your own career paths. Thank you very much. I'll be dropping off now and handing the panel over to our moderator, Sarah.
Hello, thank you. My name is Sarah, and I'll be moderating today. I'm a 3D game art generalist and tech artist at Spryfox. I'm also a board member of the Seattle Indies and co-founder of Diversity Collective, which is why I'm here today. I'm going to do a round of introductions with everyone, and I'll start kind of how you're appearing on my screen. So Leah, I'll send it to you first.
Hi, I'm Leah Hoyer, and I'm currently leading up an incubation project at Bungie right now. I also have my own studio called Level-Headed Games that I started about 1.5 years ago that focuses on mobile games and things that are a lot of interactive storytelling, because that's my background. Prior to this, I was the VP of Creative at Telltale Games. Rest in peace, Telltale Games. And before that was at both ArenaNet and Xbox. And before that, I used to make cartoons for Disney. So I was there for quite a long time, helping to develop them and finding the teams of people that were there. And before that, I used to be a lawyer, and I don't do that anymore because I'm not Ben. So yeah, I've gone through quite a different journey, but I think we're going to dive into some of that. But that's me.
All right, Juan.
Sure. Hi everybody. My name is Juan Gril, and I am a game designer first and foremost. Although I have worn different hats, I have been a producer. I have been a studio manager, founder of my own company and ran it for 12 years. I have a background in casual gaming. That's my specialty. And I am currently running a really tiny studio where we continue making casual games. But also in parallel, I have gone back into coding and I'm making augmented reality experiments. I don't call them games. It's just experiments, and I see how people are interacting with them because I'm very interested in the field.
Next up, Serena.
Hello, my name is Serena Robar. I'm the CEO of AuthorDigital and Adept Games. I've been in the games space for about 20 years. I started out in community management and worked my way up to narrative design and to production. I worked on all the major IPs, Pokemon, Marvel, Star Wars. Now our company, Adept Games, is creating an original IP that we're building games in. We just formed a partnership with Super.com Fund that was announced a couple months ago. So that's what we're working on.
And Torrie.
Hey, I'm Torrie. I just actually have left Hairbrained Game Studios as COO. It was a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful studio, and I was growing it from a Kickstarter to a 2-game published studio through Paradox Interactive, and now I just moved over to Pokemon, and I am heading up a new unit, digital marketing, for the Pokemon Company. Super excited about that. I have been a leader and studio manager for various games and studios, from Sony to Warner Brothers to Universal. And I'm super excited to be here because I have a really crazy, diverse background that has absolutely no sense to it, but opportunistically. And I think that's probably the most important thing in games, is the opportunistic experience. So that's what I hope to impart today.
And last but not least, Christina.
Hi everyone, my name's Christina, and I currently consult in the esports and game publishing space. I also teach esports business management related courses at Becker College, which is a school here in Worcester, Massachusetts. Prior to that, though, I was the general manager of eLeague and vice president of esports for Turner Sports. There I led the development and strategy and launch of eLeague, which was a transformative esports brand that we launched in partnership with IMG. But I've spent about 20 years in the games business, starting out at Nickelodeon and Viacom and working on big brands like SpongeBob SquarePants and Star Trek, and also working for Warner Brothers Games and also Electronic Sports League.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. If we haven't said it enough already, I want to start where all of your careers started, and talk about what your first step was into the game industry and how you found that opportunity. If you had support systems that you relied on at that time, and especially in the beginning.
Well, since I just ended my last thing with I started at Nickelodeon and Viacom, I'll start. I am a lifelong gamer. If there's a console, I played it. If there's a game genre, I played it. And when I graduated college, I was looking for a job, and my old college roommate had already gotten a job at Viacom Consumer Products in the licensing division, and told me that there was an opening for an assistant in what we called back then the interactive division, which means video games nowadays, or any type of kind of interactive entertainment. But and so I ended up getting the job there, and worked on a lot of different video games, and then also kind of migrated to mobile and online gaming as well. And when we merged with Nickelodeon, I started overseeing business operations for their mobile stuff. I definitely had, a good support system, and I'm in touch with a lot of, there were a lot of women that worked there, actually. So I was very fortunate to start in the consumer products group, where it was, the president was a woman, the SVP were a woman, like there were nary actually male executives. And so I was really, really fortunate to start there, and had some really good bosses and mentors in the beginning of my career.
For me, I came at it really sideways. I was working at the cosmetics counter. I was managing a Princess Marcella Borghese counter at Macy's. And a gal came up and said she was getting ready for an interview. And so I thought she meant she needed help. So, we talked makeup, we spruced her up. And as we were talking, she's like, I would love it if you were to come interview. We're looking for a manager for a PC, a location-based PC entertainment. So kind of think early days of internet cafe, I know. And I was like, oh, well, this is very interesting to me. And so I was hired to basically run the front end of a location-based PC entertainment internet cafe for the most part. But it was done very thematically. So what we did is we had ATF and Warbirds and Duke Nukem 3D, and Descent. And so you would get in these giant pods that were metal cockpits, basically, because the founders were people that had been ex-Navy. pilots. And so, so you had this huge like screen in front of you, and you had the thunder seats and stuff like that. And so the whole idea was that people would come in and they would get a tour. And so we would give them a tour, and then they would sign up for these missions. And the missions were at least an hour long. And we were located next to Boeing and very close to Microsoft. So we attracted a lot of attention because we were using public PCs from Microsoft. And so they would come and they would bring like all the old time Dwayne Bob, everyone would come over and play, and it was called The Other Side. And so when there was a job opening at zone.com, which was an internet platform where you could go and play anywhere from Bridge to Age of Empires, and they were looking for an events coordinator, they reached out and was like, hey, we always come here. This would be great for you. And then I kind of switched over into online gaming, and it was one of those weird things where it was not what I was looking for. It wasn't something I even thought about, but it was such a natural fit. So I went that direction. And as far as support structure, at the time I was freshly divorced with a small child. And because I grew up in a very small town in Eastern Washington, where you could do anything you wanted to because there just wasn't enough bodies literally to do all the sports and stuff. So there wasn't that high bar of, do you have talent? Doesn't matter. You're a physical being. You can do this. And the fact that I was raised by a single mom, it didn't occur to me that I couldn't just switch over and try something new. Like I've never, like, I think there's a lot of that fear of like, oh, what if they don't like me? What, I don't think I have the skill set. It just never occurred to me that I couldn't, because you just do. You do what you have to do to go to the next step. And if you want to, you just try it. And so I guess it depends on where you come from that way, on, how you're modeled, and like, oh, of course I can do this. And maybe that's just blind luck or ignorance, perhaps. It's just like, well, sure, I'll totally try this. This will work. And that's kind of how I started out in my career.
Is there anybody else? I think like this is one of the points where we're here is there's so many ways to get into game development and so many irregular paths into game development that I want to know what advice you have to students who have just graduated or people who are trying to change careers and make that kind of shift. What advice would you give to them who are looking for that position right now, especially if there's somebody who would want to be in your shoes one day?
I'm happy to field some of that, because I think I've been in probably 3 fairly distinct phases of my career, and really got into video games, and definitely a place that I consider myself much more mid-career. But I think it was really key to build and find the connections from all the things that I had done before. There is no one right way to get into the video games industry. I think you're going to get that as a theme from this group. And I think part of it, to build on what Serena was saying, is, some of it takes some confidence in yourself, and a willingness to sort of take a chance on the fact that you've developed skills in other places that very much can sort of move into the video game space as well. And I think for me, I was an attorney for all of like 2 years. I'm still a member of the Washington State Bar, but that's just because as my backup plan, I never want to take that test again. So, that's like, it's worth the $150 a year to like keep my bar going, and that's about it. But I really always loved animation, and I decided that I wanted to make cartoons for a living. I think it just was one of those things where I had to become an adult to realize it wasn't a bunch of 7-year-olds sitting around in a room making cartoons, that this was an actual career. And so I went down and I went to UCLA's MFA program in animation, mostly because I wanted to feel like I understood things, like I gave myself the education. And so I took a big step back from what I was doing to, live in a very small place in LA and eat top ramen again and all of that. But it was because I really felt like I needed to just pursue this and have a chance to do something that was creative and that reached a lot of people. And fortunately, I got a job, much like Christina, at Disney as someone's assistant, and went in, and I was excited because I went in for an informational interview with someone thinking maybe I could figure out how to turn that into an internship. And she was like, we actually have an opening right now. Me and this other person need an assistant. I was like, I could get paid and I could be at Disney and soak up all this awesome stuff. And really over the course of, my 9 years there, I wound up working on about 25 different animated series. The first one I was on was Recess, and the last one I was on in a major way was Phineas and Ferb. So it was a pretty big swath of stuff. And over time, I just got a chance, like it's Disney, and that's what gave me the inroad, because if they have a project, they will do everything with it. So I sort of was in this role of both the creative executive from their side, but also in many ways the brand manager. And so I would do things like approve Happy Meal toys and look at bed sheets. But they also then was like, what are they doing with their video games? And so I got to be more involved with both web-based things as well as DS games. And then ultimately I got the chance to work on a couple projects that were these cool live immersive experiences. One was on a cruise ship, and then one was in Epcot Center. And I was working with like Imagineers on this really immersive thing for Kim Possible, which was a show that I was the creative exec on. And something absolutely clicked for me there, because I was the one sort of rewriting the scripts for it, because the people who were making the show had no time to do that. And so I was kind of this person in the middle who then all of a sudden was handed an opportunity to do something I'd never done before. But I found when I had the opportunity then to make stories with players and like talk about like a need to motivate them to do stuff, you actually are in Epcot Center having to walk around to do various things. I was like, this is the coolest kind of content, and I need to do more of this. And that just like flipped something in my head. And while I still love animation, the fact that I could do something interactive all of a sudden clicked. And then I think that's when I had to look sort of to this point of whether you're early in career or mid-career, you might have to do some sacrifices. Like keep that in mind. Like if this, like, get paid what you're worth. Don't get me wrong. Like there's a lot of bad stories about doing some of that. But at the same time, like I had to take a step back to go to animation school, and I had to make some changes and move around quite a bit to sort of do those next things. But I was really excited about the chance then to come up to Xbox and wind up working in their narrative design group, because, and I really think I made the case for myself in part because while I hadn't done that exact thing with like AAA titles and other things, I could very much look back and try to draw those connections between things that I had done previously. And I think that's really important because there's, especially if it's your first job in the games industry, you haven't done this exact same thing before, but I bet you have a lot of the skills that are necessary. And how do you sell that part and get people who will back up the fact that, yeah, you're worth taking a chance on, I think, is really critical. So yeah, but if it's what you want to do, again, don't be a lawyer, go make cartoons and then make video games. Again, sorry, Ben. You be a lawyer, you're really good at it. It was not my calling. So, but figure out if that's really what you need to do, then you can make the story of your own career, I think is really key.
I think that's a great point. And that like it highlights as well the different positions that there are in game development, that they're linked to so many different careers in ways that you wouldn't expect. I want to ask Torrie or Juan, I know like one way that a lot of people get into the industry is through like a network or through mentors or people that help them through. Both Christina and Leah have talked about like people that hired them through as assistants or through a different route than they were expecting. And I'm curious if you have any advice for this, for how you would get connected to a mentor or how you have gotten connected to mentees and helped other people in their career as well.
Mm-hmm. Torrie, would you like to go first?
Juan, you go first. I'll go second.
That's good. So in my personal case, one thing that I try to do is to participate in as many professional organizations as I could. I've been part of the group that puts together the Game Developers Conference every year for the past 13 years. And I'm a judge of the Independent Game Festival at Tokyo Game Show. And these are things that they came one after the other just because I was part of IGDA. I'm a lifetime member of IGDA for the past 15 years. It was really important for me to be part of the industry by being part of the organizations. In 2003, I was part of the group that wrote the IGDA Casual Games white paper, for example. And all it took was for me to say, hey, I'll be an editor. I'll write stuff down. I answered an email. It was literally, I was part of the list, the casual gaming list at from the IGDA, and I said, I'll be the guy who will be editing text from other people. I'll be more than glad to do that, and that allowed me to meet other people. So the best way to network is to really participate in as many organizations as you can, to come out to these events, because then in the after the chat after, you can meet somebody that then you LinkedIn or you talk later. It's a very interesting time, and I know this year especially it might be hard for a lot of people because of COVID, but there are some different tools that you can use. I've been introduced to a tool that I don't know if it's still invite only, but you should keep it in mind. It's called Lunch Club. And basically they run an algorithm that crawls LinkedIn and looks at all your contacts, and basically every week they hook you up with somebody that you might not know, but 70 people in your network do you have in common. And they basically hook people together, and I've been having really good meetings with that. So there are different ways. There are really different ways. But the one thing that I would say is be part of the industry by helping the organizations that really drive to get the industry forward.
I love that, Juan, by the way. Good advice, and I will check that out for sure. So my experience has been, I've never had a mentor. I was grown up in the era that there were no mentor. That wasn't even a phrase when I grew up in the industry. So I would say that my experience and where I lean in is to my allies versus mentors. Mentors are hard to find, and they organically happen. I don't believe that mentors are something that you push into and grab and own, because it has to be a relationship. And mentorship is hard. It's a lot of work, and it also is it's not innate. It's a hard position to fill, and a hard responsibility to fill for others if you are doing it right. And so there's been this movement towards seeking out mentors, and that's kind of like seeking out a job position. I honestly think that the way our world works is with allies and friends and people you know in the industry. So the way I have gotten ahead is to keep my friends close, and to keep the people that I have hired and that I have mentored internally, developed internally towards their career, both within a company and outside of a company. So what they are truly good at and what they should be pushing toward. I love developing people and my staff toward greater and better, and it doesn't mean necessarily within the position that they have. It means what they're best at and what they should be pushing toward. And so between the mentorship internally for me, for my own staff, and allying with all of the people I know externally in the industry, that is how I truly feel like I make an impact and get ahead.
I think that's a great point, and I think that's one that we don't hear a lot, because there is a push, like you said, towards telling people that are new to the industry, like, you need a mentor, find a mentorship, and that's your road in. So I think another thing you said that I want to ask about, whether if you have an answer to this or somebody else, is for people that are inside your community that you're fostering their learning and their career growth and their progression, whether in their field or into a different field or different area of games. Like, what have you done for those people to help them advance their career and continue getting access to education and learning and progressing?
I would love to piggyback on Torrie's brilliant thoughts. What we do at our company is mentorship is one of the pillars of AuthorDigital and Adept Games. And so everyone new coming into the industry, and even those that have been in the industry for a while, they are partnered with somebody within the company that is their, we call them the mentor, but basically it's the person you go to when you have a question. So a lot of times you might feel like it's a rudimentary question and you're new and you're shy and you don't want to say, like, should I know this? Because it could be either anything from a terminology that we're using in the company that everyone seems to know, and you're like, I'm a little shy. And you can ask them, and there's no retribution, right? It's like, and I do this all the time. I actually, as CEO of the company, have mentors within the studio, even though I've been in the industry for a long time, where I don't know everything there is to know about the art pipeline. I don't know everything there is to know, but I think one of the superpowers you can have is to know what you don't know, and to ask. And it's totally fine to ask people and to have that humbleness of heart to be like, I have a question about this. And people really, really embrace that. I think we're fearful because we think we don't have enough experience. So if we say that we don't know something, it's a negative thing. But I would much rather, in everyone we hire, have somebody that says, I don't know this, but I can learn it, or I know enough about it, but I need to have a little more clarification, because that is someone who can learn. And none of us started in this industry. I mean, my God, when I graduated college, people were, coding in Fortran. No one does that anymore. So unless you can learn, show me you can learn, and show me that you're willing to ask. And that will get you leaps and bounds above somebody that won't ask questions and that will keep it all inside and think I'll figure it out on my own, because we're all in this together and none of us get out alive. So we need to depend on one another and ask one another.
Yeah, I do want to piggyback too on both. I think something that Leah talked about earlier, and also Torrie and Serena, is, the first question about getting into the game industry. I think one thing that I see it a lot in esports too, is people who say, I want to get into games, I want to get into esports. And then you kind of push them further and you say, okay, well, how can you contribute? What do you want to do within the industry? And they're like, anything, I'll just do anything. And so I think that there needs to be a switch in mentality there, right? Is to find those things, those key things that you're good at, or those key things that you're passionate about, hone those skills, and be able to articulate how you can translate them to whatever job that you're looking for. In addition, as Torrie said, mentorship is a heavy lift for a mentor and a mentee. And sometimes it's more so for the mentee, because you have these people that are like, I need to go find a mentor. And then it's the same kind of attitude. Like, I just want to get into games, I need to find a mentor. And then they find the mentor, and then they just sit and they wait for the mentor to provide this sage advice that will just blow their mind and like open up their world to something. And that's not actually how a mentor-mentee relationship works. It requires the mentee to really come with kind of pointed issues or pointed questions, right? Or things that they're not familiar with, that they want to, glean your experience or really hear your point of view. And in addition, as a mentor, right? Like, going back to the thing about, within the company and stuff like that. And your question, Sarah, about how do you do that within the companies that you work for? I think if you're going to have a positive development or mentor-mentee relationship, yes, you have to kind of keep your company and maybe your employees in mind, but you have to go at it with the attitude of a unselfish kind of view, meaning you can't do it because you just want them to be better at your company or better at the job that they're doing for you or something that will benefit you, right? If you're going to be, I think, the most effective as an advisor, mentee, developer, you really have to go at it with the attitude that you're really just trying to further them as a person, as a potential employee somewhere else. Maybe during the mentor-menteeship, they'll realize that the job they're doing is not for them, and they'll move on to a different job that fits them better and they're happier. And then ultimately, yes, it does benefit the company because it's maybe somebody who's not in the right position. But I think it's, so I'm just piggybacking kind of on what everyone else is saying, but key things are the big, like, I just want to get into games, or I just need a mentor and I'll be all set. And it's, you have to kind of go in with some goals.
And I
think it's a new paradigm.
Torrie, go ahead. No, I'm just flabbergasted and delighted that Christina's so smart. I'm just like, preach, sister, preach. It's brilliant.
And I do. I think it's a new paradigm. I don't think it is this mentor relationship. I think it's an ally relationship where you gather your allies. So within your peers and your upper network, you join hands, right? So there's this ally network where it's a skating thing where you're all skating together and you're holding hands, and it's called the whip it. And you whip that last person up to the front, and that person is skating, and then you lift them, right? And so that is the ally network that is needed in the game space to move people forward. It's what we did in the studio space, the entertainment space at Disney and Warner Bros. Because it's a turnstile in the entertainment industry. And you learn to connect yourself to your allies and your friends and your peers. And it's not a mentorship thing. It's a combining of the power thing.
And I think to that point is, when everyone ever asks me when I go speak at a college or whatever, what's your one bit of advice? Now, everybody write this down. Whoever's listening, listen to what I'm telling you very, very specifically. The best advice I'm going to give you in your life as you go through is behave. We are in a very small industry. I know everybody who works in it. If I don't know them, I know someone who knows them. So if you are difficult to work with, if you are someone that's not someone I want to spend any time with, I'm going to know about it. So if you're somebody who is open and somebody who wants to learn, I'm going to find out about that. And you know what? Someday I will work for you. Because that's how this works.
That's the ally network.
Exactly. Someday I will be looking for a job because this industry is very cyclical and whatever. And someday I'm going to be looking for a job and I'm going to work for someone who worked for me at one point. Or mentorship goes back and forth. It is not a one-way street where tell me your sage advice, I will listen to it and I will walk away. It's much like a relationship, right? You would never look at your partner and say, be my everything. I'm just going to wait for you to fulfill every need I have. Oh, dear God, that's not going to work, by the way. That's a whole other conversation, but don't do that. You need to have multiple mentors. You need to be, and you have to give. You have to give as well as you receive. And that's where you're going to find the biggest benefits.
This is awesome. Thank you all. This is advice that I think doesn't get heard a lot, and also I think people need to hear. But I want to move forward so we can talk a little bit more about like moving through the industry pipeline, moving through sort of mid-career space, taking your first step into being in a lead position. And I want to know what roadblocks mid-career developers face when they're trying to make that move into a leadership role for the first time, and what are common mistakes that you see people make.
Oh, so many.
I will say one of the things, and this is, I will say it's a thread that we've already sort of heard about it's really good to know and acknowledge what you don't know. And I'd say that's important all along the way. It's probably toughest mid-career. I think, in a way, because at the beginning you realize you're coming in at something probably pretty entry level, and everyone expects that they're going to have to train you. And by the time you're the CEO, at some point, even if you don't know it, well, then you hire more people who will know the thing, and it's just that sort of way. Whereas in the middle, I think it's tougher. And I think for a lot of people, there's a real insecurity around that, admitting that it's not there. And I will say that I think is one of the really good lessons that I learned somewhere in the middle of my career, is that it is good that you are always learning, and that you're always expected to be learning, and understanding that that is actually part of what any company actually really wants you to do, is to recognize the fact that you've got these. And what I will say is that so many people, like when I do panels, I get so many questions very often, and particularly for women, around things like imposter syndrome. And I will say the biggest thing that I will say around that is, I don't have imposter syndrome because I've realized now I'm not supposed to know everything. And I think that that's such a huge lesson that I learned somewhere in the middle of my career, is that it's okay not to know everything. You want to ask people for help. You're going to be better if you do something together and you leverage everyone's expertise. And along the way, you're going to get better at those things because you're around it. But that's a really natural part of the process. And I think something that can derail a lot of people kind of mid-career, because they're, I think, either worried, I don't know enough. I don't have 100% of the skills to do this thing yet, so I shouldn't do it, or feel that way, but then hide it from people. So either they don't apply for the roles, or they don't push for the promotion, or then they're in there and they're stressing themselves out because they're not asking for enough help. And neither one of those is a sustainable way to be. And so I think it's really important to understand that, particularly if you're in a healthy environment at work, which, let's admit, not everybody is, but there is absolutely an expectation from a good, healthy workplace, from good managers, that you don't know all the things and that you're expected to ask for help. And it's a way better thing to do that than to try and fake it. And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson I learned in middle career, and I would really pass that along to folks.
And if you have advice for somebody who is stuck in a situation where they're in a studio where it seems problematic, or they're on a team that isn't treating them right, like what steps they should take to get out of that situation, or move to a different studio, or find themselves in a better position?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we all find ourselves in a job, and I look at Juan knowingly, where we find ourselves in a situation where we're just like, this might be dysfunctional, and then you're like, well, right, what can I do to fix this? Is the first question. But I'm often amazed how many jobs exist that we had no idea that was a thing, right? So we tell young people, hey, decide what you're gonna do for the rest of your life when you're 17, when you've had zero life experience and you don't actually know what jobs are out there. So I wanna be in games. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a billion different ways to be in games, and there could be this one weird little area that you have this, skill set that doesn't match anywhere else. And how would you even know that until you carve something like that out? One of the things that we do at our company is we're very strong about, we hire a person, not a job. So there's a job description we're looking at, but I really want to look at what you are as a person and all the things you offer, because I will modify a job based on the right person. And I see lots of people nodding. I think they do the same thing, where you're just like, you're this wonderful, unique creature with this wonderful, unique skill set. And why would I say I'm only going to hire you if you can do this, when you have all this other thing where I'm like, I need all this other thing. Let's find a position, let's find something and modify it so it fits for you. And I think that people have to look innately at themselves and say, I'm mid-career, I want to go to the next level. A, what is the next level for you? And B, is it a lateral move to go up? Is it a downward move to go up and over? I think a lot of times you have to leave something and either rediscover your passion for it. Like, oh, I went from community management into production. And I went to community management into production because I got burned out on community management. It can be stressful. I'm very empathetic. It can be very toxic for a woman running that. And you just need a break sometimes. And it's like, well, what else can I do? I didn't want to get into games, but I'm also incredibly organized. So production made a good transition for me where like, I understand all the pieces that I need. And then I brought this skill set of community management to my production side of it. My job then became like, I think one of my superpowers is I actually understand what my ask is to you. Like, I don't ask somebody for something unless I know how it affects their life. And if you don't have a diverse background, if you don't actually try different things, I think that makes you stronger and better. When I look at somebody as a candidate and they're like, I've done QA, I've done this, I've done that, I'm like, this is someone who understands the entire cycle of game development. This is a benefit. And yeah, they might not have a leadership role yet, but I bet I can make that person a leader. I can help them develop those skill sets, and then I will bring that person up. And I think a lot of companies will be that way. They just need to see you, and you need to be honest with that. I don't even know if that answered your question. I just went on a tangent. There you go.
I would like to add, as far as mid-career and what you're focusing on, that there's two distinct tracks, right? So there's the individual contributor track, and that tends to be where you have a specific focus. Are you an artist? Are you a writer? Are you an engineer? Are you a designer? There's the manager track, where you are managing people. Those are two totally separate tracks that, for me as a manager, I focus with my staff on what do you want to be when you grow up. And I constantly ask myself that, like, you know, I'm older than all of you, and I am always asking myself what I want to be when I grow up. What do I want to be in this next iteration of me? And I think it's really important in your mid-career to ask, what is important to you? What is going to give you passion? What is going to make you wake up every day and want to go to your fucking job? Right? So if it's, I want to lead people and I want to make an impact and I want to give up my individual contributor art track to be an art director, that's totally different than I just want to create incredible 3D art. And that is, number one, what I think is very important for a manager to dig in constantly with your people around what they want to do constantly, even if it's uncomfortable, like, well, we don't have that job. It's still really important to ask your people that. And then on the flip side, for yourself, mid-career, what do you want to do? What is going to make you passionate about working every day? Is it, I want to dig into my specific role and I only want to do this one thing, and I want to write. I want to art. I want to engineer. Or I want to make an impact across the discipline. That is where the right turn or the left turn, I think, happens.
I think people also.
Sorry. I wanted to just add to that too, that it's also okay if what you want is, I want to be home at 5:30 every night because I want to hang out with my kids.
Totally.
And so you have to be super honest with yourself about what you really want, not just from your job, but from your life, so that you can really kind of look at those and be finding the balance. And, you know, it may be that I'm not a parent, but I can understand why that would be a huge issue. You might want to, the location where you're working is really important. The amount of how much stress you're going to take home, like all of those things, it's so important to be honest with yourself and not just at this point accept the, you know, some amount of game industry like dogma that said that, you know, you're gonna have to work 60 hours a week, or you're gonna have to, you know, do these various things to be able to hit that thing that you're supposed to want. Like, you're supposed to want to have a really good life, and your job is part of that. So be thinking about those aspects when you're also thinking about what's exciting for you in your career too.
Yeah, I mean, I think so a lot of people equate like being an executive at a video game company or a manager is the path to success. Like, that's what they should be aiming for. Whereas, you know, maybe you are better off as an individual contributor. You'll be happier in your life. You'll be happier in your work. You know, but I think there's a lot of, you know, this is what I should be doing versus this is what I want to be doing. And so really just my advice would be listen less to the shoulds, right? Or stop listening to the shoulds and just do what you want, you know, work towards what you really, really want and what those priorities are.
And just really quick on that, if you guys want to be executives, you're not making games anymore. I mean, I hate to be that sage advice of, guess what? I'm not sitting in Scrum meetings. I'm not designing a game. I'm not doing any of that. I am in spreadsheets 24/7. I'm talking to my investors. I'm not making games. I'm enabling other people to make games. So think really hard about what you want and what brings you joy. And you, like everyone said, you don't, a lot of times you think I have to become a people manager to take that next step in my career, and you don't have to. Find your joy and stay there, and be okay with that, and be like, this is where my passion is. Because I know tons of people that take the next step and they're like, now I get to run my own company. I get to make all the shots. Oh my God, how many shots I don't get to make could fill a book. Where I am the, I joke often that the best training I ever had to be CEO is to be a parent. Quite honestly, because what I have is very passionate, artistic people that all have great opinions and great ideas, and I am mitigating and I am managing and I'm negotiating. This is my life now. Do I ever even talk about the game? Probably not. Very little. What I'm doing is I'm enabling brilliant people to do what they do best. So if you like to make the game, don't have my job. Just don't.
We've got a question in chat that I want to raise that says, what this conversation is not acknowledging is the problem of being hampered by being a woman trying to get an executive role. And I think we can fit any marginalized identity in that slot. They say there's a large barrier to being promoted when the male leaders are promoting their friends. And I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, it's a problem in many organizations. It's a huge problem in many organizations. And it's part of the sick nature of where we started. I can always mention that in the mid-90s, when I was looking for a job in the industry, I almost didn't work in games because I went to interviews and I went to video game companies, and the bro culture and the people that I was finding in front of me was completely against what I believed it was. And at the same time, the industry was getting into this perception of creating realistic, bloody type of games that I didn't want to make. Duke Nukem just came out. This was 1996. And I hated that. And I decided to go into the internet bubble and work on internet websites for a while until I could figure it out. It was a very huge disappointment for me. And then I found that through working at an internet company, there was a games group, and this games group was actually doing chess and canasta and all these games, and there were 25 million players playing every month when the internet was 200 million people at the time, right? I saw that there was a nascent part of the industry where I could be part of. And actually, I could have my grandma play a game or my mother play a game instead of having these dudes playing video games, right? And to me, it was important to find a place. So all this intro was just to say, when you are a woman who is in an organization like that, that is the wrong organization for you. And there's people in this group who are creating great organizations that support that will support you. So the number one thing that you need to do is to get the fuck out of that organization, because those organizations don't change. Those white dudes at the top of the organization, they don't change. So just don't work for them. Don't give them your intelligence. Just go somewhere else, please. And network with people who will be supporting you.
Go ahead, Lee. Sorry. Go ahead.
I will say, now I've been in the games industry for about a decade full time. So I've sort of hit about the same amount of time that I did in TV. And it feels like it's really interesting to me to look back at just a decade and actually see that things are changing. I will say it was slow. And I will not lie and say that I don't feel like on the outside of some inside jokes sometimes, or that I'm not part of the, the old school like leadership of whatever company I've been in. But what's interesting to me is I feel like when I was making a move, like when I was at Xbox, I wound up being on sort of a leadership team where I was the first and only woman there. Moved to ArenaNet, I was the first and only woman director there. Went to Telltale, I was the first and only female vice president there, and now I will say the good thing is that the appetite of the industry is really getting to a point where it's not stomaching it anymore. I think because enough of us are there that we're also really starting to make waves. Honestly, I don't want to be quiet in a meeting room where someone says something that you realize I don't think you meant it this way, but it's like, okay, if I look at it in the best light, I know that that's not what you meant, but you know what? I'm tired of looking at things in the best light. It's just not what I'm supposed to do anymore. I'm supposed to call it out and be like, we have to be better. And and I think therefore I've seen for myself more opportunities, but I think I've also seen for other people more opportunities because this comes back to sort of Torrie's discussion too, of your allies and getting enough people in there to hit a critical mass that we're just not gonna accept that the only qualified people for this position are old white guys, because old white guys are the only ones who've been doing it before, and you're just kind of that's just a bunch of bullshit. And I think it doesn't tend to be at that level anymore. It now tends to be much more kind of blind spots, I guess, is the thing. And so therefore it's, I think, really incumbent upon the group of us here as leaders to also make sure that we're pointing those out, we're calling them out. You don't have to do so in a super angry, over the top way, but the fifth time it happens, I'm probably going to get pretty angry.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Call it the first time. And yes, absolutely. If it happens the second time, the third time, you're absolutely entitled to raise the level, because they don't pay attention to you.
And I think a lot of us feel like we're not just entitled. I kind of feel a responsibility being at a certain level in certain, companies to actually say something. And I think there's enough people there who also feel the same way. I will say, I feel extremely supported at Bungie. It's a company that when I went to when I was first interviewing there a while ago and then was doing some consulting and then they brought me over, I think I really expected that because of the games they make that it was going to be really bro-y, and by and large, honestly, I kept being surprised and kind of shocked at how supportive and just open and wanting to kind of, they don't have a high percentage of women in the company, but they would like to get better. That doesn't mean, though, that years and years of experience in doing things certain ways hasn't built up kind of exclusionary practices that are just kind of built into things. And it's important that I think if you get to that point where you're at your mid-career, or you are an executive, it's really important to also be making sure you're calling those things out so that it just paves the way for more people. So it's not perfect. And you're right. Whoever asked this question, you are absolutely right. It's a hard road, and there are things that are built in place. I see it getting better. And I think it's important for all of us to rally around and make sure that we help it continue to get better together.
Be brave, be opportunistic, be vocal?
I'm going to add the other side of it. I empathize with this person because I'm currently looking for money for the second set of projects, which is very female focused. My studio is over 30% women, which is a huge high number in our industry. And it's because women want to work for women, first of all, but I actually go out and seek and find them. And I understand that because we have underrepresented diversity out there in the market, that they're not going to have the polished skill set. They're not going to have as much as maybe their male white counterparts. And so we are all about mentorship and bringing people in with a raw skill set to be like, we know that you can get to that next level, and we want to be a part of that. And we recognize that. I think a lot of times what I'll hear from my male counterparts is like, oh, I would love to hire a female engineer, but I'm just not getting any applications. And so my first answer to that is like, oh, do you go look for them? Well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I don't know. It's not like I'm just waiting for some dude to ask me to marry him. And I'm like, I'm not looking actively. I've been married 22 years. I'm clearly not looking actively, but I'm not, if you want something bad enough, if you make it a priority, you go look for it, right? If you need a publisher, you go find one. You're not waiting for someone to knock on your door and say, I'm the perfect publisher for you. I want to publish your game. You go look for them. So you have to make a culture choice to go look for them. If you want us all to say it's easy, it's not. But you know what? And I think to Leah and everyone else's point, it can be really bad. And so when I see things where people are trying harder and more enlightened and really want to be better, I'm so happy. And I'm like, it's so great. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but I have literally been in meetings before at strip clubs just to sign a deal, because that's where business deals happen. And unless you're willing to play the game and be like, she's cool, she's one of the guys, then you had to do it if you wanted to stay in this industry. Otherwise, you left it. And having
that
a lot of
is the past.
for a long time, you've got to just put up with it. But now you don't have to anymore. And I'm so happy about that, where people are calling it out. And you can be so much more like, are we okay with this? And I do think that most people in our industry, most men in our industry, are delightful, loving, caring people that are unaware of their biases. And sometimes when you just point it out and go like, well, you know, she doesn't have this, but she has this and that. Would you be asking the male counterpart this much? And sometimes they'll go, oh. And it's not a cognizant thing. It's like oh, you're right. It's just saying, it's a gentle nudge in the right direction. I don't think anyone responds well to a megaphone to the face about how they're wrong. But I think that 80 to 90% are decent, generous people who just want to do better. And the funny thing is about these, you know, older white gentlemen is once you hit a certain age, it certainly becomes harder for them to find work. And you'll find a whole new open heart when you hire them. And they're just like, I've been looking for, you know, I go into an interview and all of a sudden they look at me with my gray hair, and it's so much harder for them, that they become so much more aware of the obstacles that people with diverse backgrounds and women are facing in this. And they become your biggest champions. They jump on that train and they're just like, hey, equality for all. And these are people that were unaware of their privilege for so long. And I just love that part of it.
I think that, you know, I just a random background on me is I grew up in Maine, which was predominantly white. I was adopted, so my family is white. So I've always been other, right? Whether it's where I grew up or, you know, my family, or, you know, in the beginning of my career and even partially way into kind of mid-career, I always tried to fit in, right? And either be one of the guys or, you know, not come across as too Asian or, you know, and then finally, as I got further in my career and it's kind of changed a bit in the landscape, I said, fuck it. Like, I'm going to be who I am, right? Like, I am a very outspoken woman. I, you know, am very direct, and I'm going to stop shrinking myself, and I'm going to be who I am, and I'm going to call people out on their shit. And since I kind of had that mind switch, it has really ignited the trajectory of my career, because it also gets rid of a little bit of the imposter syndrome. Because honestly, I was an imposter, right? I was impersonating somebody that I actually wasn't deep down inside, because I really just wanted to kind of fit in and belong and maybe get promoted. Because, so I think, you know, Juan's point earlier about like, if a company doesn't appreciate who you are, like, screw and leave them. I think it's like, you know, it's your duty to kind of stand up, be who you are, be as authentic as possible, and, you know, call them out. And if it's still not working out, then you really have to get out of there.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of taking away your shine. But I wouldn't say get out of there right away. I would say, you know, put that try in, be yourself, be as authentic as possible, call people out on whatever privilege they have, whatever, you know, biases they have, because, you know, to a lot of people's point here, a lot of people don't even realize it's called unconscious bias for a reason, right? They don't realize a lot of the things are kind of ingrained in them. But you know, as simple as this advice is, it really is, you have to learn to be yourself. It's really hard sometimes, though, to figure out who yourself is. And that's where I think the real work is. And again, it goes back to, should I be this person or am I actually this person? Right? It goes back to those shoulds. So.
Good point.
And with self-publishing right now, we are in this golden age of game development that didn't exist before. 20 years ago, there was no option. You took the deal a publisher gave you. They were all shitty. You took all of them. You hoped it went really well. There weren't a lot of females or diverse, you know, leadership out there because people like to work with people like themselves. And if everyone around you is a certain person, they want to work with people they feel the most comfortable around. I'd like to think that we're all growing as people and realizing that the more diverse your team is, the more diverse your user base is, which just means more money. So it just makes a smart monetary decision to be as diverse as possible, because you can only attract what you create for. And if you're only creating for this small niche, you're missing this opportunity. It's always so surprising to me when I go to publishers with a female-centric game where they're just all like, I don't know, it's not something I would play. And I'm like, well, dear God, probably not. But are you here to make money? Or are you here to, you know, pick a game that you would play in this, you know, tiny niche? And I do find that the older the person is and the more experience they have in the industry, the more they realize, you know, investing in games is about what the market looks like and a little less about what they would do. And you're going to come across tons of people that eyes will glaze over and they're not going to understand what you're making. I find sometimes on the other side of the indie market, I'll go with something and they'll say your product is too big, because I'm not really an indie, right? My team is 50 people. I have an investment, like it's larger. What I do find frustration with is when I go to funds that are supposed to be for diversity. This is where I'm going to get a bit on my soapbox. It's always a much smaller amount. And it's always like a token sort of thing. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, is your game about menstruation and gamifying when you need to buy your pads? Oh, then I'm not interested. And you're like, are you kidding me? I am making a game that if you're my male counterpart were to make, you, there would not even be this question about, is this something saleable? I'm showing you my comps, I'm showing you all this stuff. But it's really more like, well, if I'm from a diverse fund, then really what I want you to do is I want you to make a game that's only for this tiny niche of diverse people, because then I can say I'm contributing to the diversity factor. When you're like, you know, diverse people can make mainstream games. We really can. We're kind of fun that way. So it's okay to be like, oh, this is a larger game by a woman or a Black man or LGBTQ, and it's a larger game that's main genre. You can invest your regular fund in that. You don't have to put us in this tiny little diverse fund where I've set aside $10 million and every play is $250,000, and that's what we do. And aren't we great? Aren't we helping diversity? And then I get a little upset and I'm just like, or here's a larger play on a game that's mainstream, that actually hits all of these points that you want, that is comparable to everything else in the market. And it just happens to have a female CEO, or it just happens to have a diverse, you know, executive thing. And we're going to be just as successful as our white male counterparts. And that's okay. You know what? You can count us at your diversity, you know, board meeting if you want to, but just give us the money for our game that makes sense. And so there is that other side of it where I'm grateful that there are funds out there. I'm happy, I'm excited that we've moved forward, but part of me also gets a little upset. We're like, can't we all just be like, here's the pot, here's the opportunity, here's what you're making, let's slot accordingly.
We're getting to the end of our time, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A, but if we can go around, I'd love to hear from each of you what you're working on now, what your goals are for your career and your teams or studios now, what you're working towards, and feel free to plug anything if there's a social media or something you want to add as well. I'll go in the same order that we did introductions. So Leah, you're first.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm working on Incubation at Bungie, so I can't tell you about it, but it's going to be really cool. So, you know, and I think really, when I look at my career and what I want to do, I honestly think of that generally in around 3-year increments. This is interesting for me because very rarely have I been in a role where I've been focused entirely on one project. Oftentimes my role has been to do things on several, maybe in a leadership capacity or hiring, or in something where 30% of my time was here, but 40 was here and 30 was there. And I will say it actually feels really cool to be diving deep in with a group of people. And I think when I look at what will be successful for me in this role is not just just coming out and, you know, making $1 gazillion and having huge fans. Obviously that's huge too, but how do you do that in a way that feels like we've made a really good process with a good feeling on the team? And that does not mean everybody's super happy every single day, because making games is hard. But how do you just feel like you've made a good team environment that people want to come? So we're not those people that you're asking questions. I think I get as much now satisfaction out of that as I do out of, you know, making stuff that's awesome, that reaches a bunch of people around the world. So.
So, Juan?
On the note of Serena commenting on the golden age of publishing, I decided that I'm going to self-publish my games. So basically, I've been working on a number of different games. One we had to cancel because it was not performing the way that we expected, and we celebrated the cancellation and we moved on. And we're now working on a puzzle game that I'm really enjoying. And we're on our second test right now, and it's looking good. So hopefully we're gonna do probably 2 more tests, because there's a few things that I'd like to tweak before we actually release it to the world. But I'm having lots of fun with that game, and I'm working on another game that as we have time, where we're testing the first one, we're testing the second one. But I'm mentioning all this because I went really small. I have already marked on my bucket list being the CEO of a company. I don't need to be that CEO anymore. I did that for 12 years. I'm done. So now I'm very small, and then my other half of the time is I'm really experimenting with augmented reality. I am building these experiences that I put in front of people, and I see what they do with them, how they interact with them. I'm just partnered with an ophthalmologist who is realizing that augmented reality can help her do tests with telemedicine, because she cannot have patients going to her office. And it turns out that a game in which you can use your eyes to detect things might actually be a useful thing to her. So I'm looking at opportunities like that to see, you know, I've been making games for 20 years. It is fun, it's still fun, and I will always be making games that are fun to play. But at the same time, I want to see what else can I do with all the knowledge I have that can make a difference in the world.
Serena?
Yes, so here's my plug. So my company, Adept Games, is looking for a publisher for its ARPG. My business partners are Serena Robar and Bill Roper. So we're making some fabulous stuff with some veteran teams. We also have a second franchise that we're spinning up called The Great Outdoors, which is very female focused in a casual space. And I would love to talk to anyone about that, because that's what we're doing. But anyone watching this stream, hit me up on LinkedIn, please. Send me a note saying, I saw you on this, I want to connect with you, and I would be happy to have virtual coffee with you. I would love to talk to you. If you have questions, please hit me up. This is what we do. This is what we bring. When you reach a certain point in your life, you look back and you have a helping hand behind you, and you bring people up, and you know that's what this is about. And if that's not what we're doing, then this is not how I want to spend my life. So I would love to talk to anyone. If they have any questions, please do.
All right, Torrie?
Serena, I'm going to hit you up. Jeez, you're just, you're a force. I love it. So I just on Friday left Harebrained Schemes as COO to move to the Pokemon company as VP of digital marketing. So I loved what I did. I love HBS. I loved being a COO and growing up the company. And I moved to the Pokemon company because it was an opportunity I couldn't refuse. I am extremely opportunistic in my career, and that is why I have been all over the place in film and TV and music and games, and my goal is always so I have a higher arching goal, and that is to straddle the line between content and technology. I love that line. It's beautiful, it's fun, it is disruptive. I don't mind disruption, and I like towing it. It's a sharp edge, I will say that. But I have found from being in the entertainment industry that the best thing for me to do is if I want to move into something new, I move out into a new company. So I subscribe to being super brave about moving around, and super open and transparent about what I know and what I don't know, and I'm super curious. And so I've had a really fun, very diverse career, and I'm looking forward to this new opportunity at Pokemon to insert some digital expertise that they haven't had before and lead at an executive level. And I like doing that. I feel like as a woman that I want to represent us at this kind of this game tech level, and I just keep pushing on in there, and I'm just going to keep being curious. And as long as people have me in companies, I'm just going to keep pushing on in.
All right, Christina, you're up.
So I am currently I took a little bit of a sabbatical from my consulting to teach at Becker. I was going to just take the first quarter off and then figure out, what was coming next. And then COVID hit. So, fun. But I'm teaching at Becker. I'm teaching 2 courses coming up this semester, basically a intro to business of esports and then an advanced topic class. And, I'm using the opportunity, it's predominantly males that are taking the class, but I'm using the opportunity to kind of represent for females in gaming and really get them to really think about the impact of what they're doing. And I think that they wouldn't normally get that lens if it wasn't, me as the professor, because let's be real, most likely the other professors are all white males. And so I'm really just focused on that, and focused on figuring out what's next for me in gaming and esports. I really do enjoy kind of the mentor allyship thing, so I'm also looking into potentially doing some executive coaching to those in the esports industry, because I think that there are a lot of players and personalities that are there that don't kind of have that coaching or leadership to kind of guide them as they either navigate their career or navigate the what's next in their career. So that's my focus, other than my cats.
All right, I'm going to pass over the chat to DM now, and they're going to ask some questions from the Twitch chat. And I'll talk to you a little bit at the end as well, but thank you all for being here, and it has been so nice to speak with you all. I feel so much positive energy and inspiration for game development right now. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to pass it over DM. It's all you.
Okay, hello. So I've been pulling some of the questions from the Twitch chat, and if you put any more of them into the chat, I should also be able to see them, but going in order. So the first question I've got is that on the flip side of calling out bad behavior, how does one go about establishing expectations for good behavior in whatever organizations?
I think a really good practice on that is very early on, whether you are leading whatever kind of team is there or you're a member of it, kind of ensuring that the teams set up agreements with one another, I think is a really useful thing. And I would keep them big and posted in a very easy to point at corner of wherever you're working, or if you're doing it digitally, bringing it up every once in a while, which reminds myself that, hey, when we were all in the office, it was right there on the wall. I should make sure that at least once a month when we have our virtual stand-ups, I'm like, hey, remember team agreements. But a lot of those really talk about, how we want to react with one another, how you want to create a safe space for differing ideas and all of that. And I think if you're a leader of a team, make sure that you do it. And if you're a member of a team and it hasn't been done, ask about it. Like, push for that, because that can be really helpful of being like, hey, if you're in a place where you felt like your voice was stomped over, or people were taking feedback personally, or some of these other things that can come up and start to create some of those more difficult to work in scenarios, then at least you have some things to point to be like, hey, remember we all agreed upon this, and let's sit back and talk about what does that mean to us, and how do we make sure that we're living that and correcting and getting back on track as much as possible.
I think to Leah's point, that's excellent. Having your pillars always available. And here's an interesting fun fact for anyone who's interviewing anywhere. I always ask everyone I'm being interviewed with, what are the 3 major pillars of your company? And if you guys can't tell me through 7 different people that you don't have the same 3 words or the same 3 pillars, then this is a company that is not cohesive, and this is not a group that actually understands what they're doing as a team, which can be problematic. And it's just a bit of a warning sign. It's just one of the things that I do when I talk to people. I always expect good behavior. I'd like to think people rise to the expectation. I think the struggle you find is in companies that have had a bad culture that are trying to revise who they are, or they've had problems and they're trying very hard to be like, we're woke now, we're going to do these things. Because what you have is you have this awareness, but do you really have the change of everything underneath it, right? It's very hard to make a cake taste really sweet if you never put sugar in it. And now you're saying, oh, we're a cake. Taste us, we're good, because the base ingredients have not necessarily been modified. So I kind of expect the good behavior. You kind of want to build from that, and then you want to adjust. So it's totally fine to continuously award the good and talk privately about things that are problematic. But you can go the opposite very quickly. I work with brilliant, talented people that are so afraid of saying the wrong thing in this current climate that I actually have to set them aside and say, it's okay. Like, if the artists are like making these brilliant models and they're like, well, we're going to do a modesty sock on the female models. I'm like, why are we spending extra time to do that? Well, we don't want to offend. And I'm like, because they're so conscientious and they so don't want to offend. They overcorrect so far in the other way, where you're like, well, we're actually getting in the way of game development. I think we all understand what a female model looks like. We don't have to worry about if this is a fae or whatever, that it's okay. And everyone agrees, much to Leah said, it's like, we all agree that this is okay, and to move forward that way. And so just being really empathetic to where someone else is coming from is super helpful.
I think we need to allow people to, hitching on to what Serena said, I think we have to allow people to make mistakes and not make them feel like cancel culture is, a thing, because I think so many people are afraid of, even in allyship, right? They're afraid of foot faulting or doing something or saying the wrong thing. So they just don't do it. And if you create an environment which makes it scary for them to be able to make those mistakes, they'll never learn from, they'll just be afraid to kind of do anything. I remember it was actually an unconscious bias training when I was at Turner, and we were talking, and they had people kind of raise their hands to talk about times that, they were misjudged just by their looks. And, a bunch of people raised their hand, and not one white male raised their hand in the room, because they were so terrified of saying, like, I have been misjudged, because they were terrified that people were going to jump all over him. Like, what are you talking about? You're a white male. You've never had a problem your entire life. And so, so the moderator basically had to call that out, right? And say, look around the room, like, we need to foster an environment where it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to make mistakes, as long as, you learn from them and you can have meaningful dialogue. So whether you're a leader or you're somebody more on the junior level, I think it does everyone a disservice if you're automatically just getting defensive because you're just, so like hypersensitive to everything that's going on. But there's a time and a place to have those conversations and bring them up. Again, even if you're not on the leadership level, to talk about what made you uncomfortable, but, do it in a way that's not an accusatory, they had malicious intent right away way, right? There's a way to kind of say, what you said made me feel this way. I realized there was no malicious intent, but so then they kind of realize it, and it's kind of safe for them to, for all intents and purposes, fuck up, because it will happen.
Right. Thank you. I guess part of this question was already covered by that answer, because the next one was, as women in minority in executive roles, how do you promote these inclusive environments? Like, is there training or other actions that you can take? And how can you go about calling out people for problematic behaviors? I think, Christina, you covered a lot of that already. If anybody else has any other things to add to that.
I do want to add that, like, you also have to check your own biases, right? Like, in order to be an effective leader, to make sure that your teams are, learning and growing and having their own, realizations about their unconscious bias, like, you also have to do the work. Like, just because I am a minority and I'm a woman does not mean that I don't have, like, unconscious bias, or I have, notions in my head about what's going on that are wrong, probably, right? And so if you don't make yourself vulnerable to the team, for lack of better words, there's no way that they're going to give you that respect back, right? Because they just don't trust it, right? Like, if I'm, the grand poobah of all things diverse and all things female, how are they even ever going to feel open to having, conversations or making that culture be something that they want to be a part of or change? I think as a manager, you just can't sit on a cloud and pretend that you are the most perfect, most.
And having a chip on your shoulder is really difficult to work with. Like, it's sort of like you've been hurt before, and then you just sort of like assign to the next relationship all of your hurts and your betrayals from the previous one, and then you're never going to be able to move forward. So I think every single one of us can point to where we've been misfairly treated, where we've been treated, where these things have come into play, and you kind of have to be like, am I going to wear this heavy armor that's going to keep me down? Or am I going to be like, everybody's different, I'm going to push it away, and I'm just going to kind of hope for the best and be like, this is how I'm going to be better moving forward. I do deal with people that kind of get a little upset, and then they have that chip on their shoulder, and you're just like, that's holding you back. That's not, it's like when someone breaks up and they're like, I'm never going to date anyone else again, and I'll show them. And you're like 20 years later, and that person never thinks of you ever again over 20 years. And you've spent your entire life just like, haha. And you're just like, this didn't actually work out like you thought, because you wasted 20 years in bitterness, and this other person hasn't thought of you in 20 years. So when people wrong you, it's sad and you want to get closure, but at the same token, don't wear that. Don't own that. When someone wrongs you, that's not you. Don't own their horribleness, because that keeps you down. Let it go. That's why forgiveness is an amazing thing that people are just like, oh, it's so hard to forgive. Don't forgive them for them. Forgive them for you. Just be like, I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm not going to let this keep me down, because I'm going to move forward and be upward, as opposed to being like, ugh, bear down with this and take this into the next job, relationship, whatever.
And I will say that there is a time and place to call people out on stuff, and there's a time when things actually need that sort of level of action. But I find that you'll probably find just as much, if not more, success by modeling good behavior, calling out good behavior. I will say the thing that you've probably noticed about everyone who's on this panel that they've been actively doing is being things like Christina said, or that point that Juan brought up. I'd like to add on to that thing, being able to then acknowledge that other people did good work is something that very often underrepresented groups, especially in the gaming industry, is one of the things that people complain about the most. Is like, I said this thing and other people got credit for it, or I said this thing and then they couldn't remember who said that. Like, we just naturally now have been like, you know how we can stop that? Let's make sure that we like hit on the fact that these people are the ones who came up with this really great thing to say. Just little elements like that in your daily behavior start to model awesome behavior. And you can model awesome behavior at any level of a company. Like, it can be your second day on the job of your first games industry job ever, and you can teach people how it's done if you come in and you present yourself in a really strong, open, caring way that is looking out for other people. That doesn't get in the way of your progress. And to Serena's point, and various people said this, the more you do that, the better your chances of really succeeding in this industry are. So be sure that you're really starting with that first, not calling other people out, but making sure that you're showing that kind of good behavior, I think is so strong and powerful.
I think that's also why, going back to like Torrie's original point about allyship, even in meetings, if you're, even in meetings, if you're a woman, person of color, and someone talks over one of your friends who's also, a woman or a person of color, and they're looking at you, you can say, actually, to say what Leah was saying, or let's let Leah finish her point, like little things like that aren't super aggressive, right? But they definitely fall back and highlight kind of what's happening. I think those are like, and that happens a lot with allies. If you just have allies in meetings with you, right, that are
so glad you said that, Christina. I think that's a really good point regarding women's innate communication style. Mm-hmm. Because there is this tendency for women to wait to say something, or to hold back and think about it for later. And in a men's environment and a tech environment and a games environment, you have to exercise your ability to speak up in a timely manner. You have to do that. And it's super important for women in particular, because that's a lot of times where they lose their power, or they lose the moment, because the moment is what matters. And it's very hard for many people to speak up right at that moment and not internalize it and kind of step back and I want to analyze it and then I want to speak. I personally think I've done well in this industry because I was a competitive athlete. I had no siblings and I had a really strong father. And I have no problem like talking immediately if someone has said something and I have an opinion. And it hasn't mattered what level I'm at. What does matter is the context that you speak in and when you speak. But I absolutely think it's super important for women in particular to know that in a world where there are mostly men in your world, you need to speak up immediately. You need to real time that conversation. And it helps tremendously in establishing a respect level, surprisingly. And it also helps you to practice that voice immediately. Like you have a voice, your voice is saying something in the background, like this is not right, I need to say something. If you practice that out loud, it's just a muscle. It's just a muscle that you gravitate toward, and that helps once you like are at that level.
It also just helps you be present, because the thing is you're thinking about something in your head. And you're like, okay, when do I say that? And then you're not actually focusing on the conversation that's happening. And so by the time you even muster up the courage to say it, one, the moment's passed, and two, you've just spent the last 30 seconds to a minute not really engaging in the conversation that's actually happening.
Or practicing it in your head, which happens. Like you got to practice it in your head. Like, okay, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it right now. And then you got to say it.
Yeah.
And also I think culture of companies plays a huge role in this. I worked with a lot of people that have come out of super large organizations, and I'm not going to name any names, but I could, where I actually want to have a counselor to have PTSD training for these poor people that come out of it, because they've been trained that they have to I don't want to say take someone else's idea, but someone else makes a point, but they make it sort of silently or weakly. And then they say, well, I think, and they reiterate the exact same thing. And it tends to be where a woman's made a point and they haven't been really assertive about it. And then they say the exact same thing. How many times have we all been in a meeting where someone's like, didn't I just say that? Right. And that's a culture thing too in your company. If you see that happening and it's your company, you want to change it. But if you're working somewhere else, that culture thing. And I've always found it's super fun to be like, someone else reiterates what I say. And I'm like, thank you, Tom, for reiterating my statement. You're absolutely right. I'm 100%. Thank you so much for being empathetic about, like, I'll jump right in and just like thank them and remind everyone I made that point, dude. But always in a very positive, sweet sort of like, thank you. Yes, you're on board. I really appreciate it. There are little things like that you can do that can be annoying. Absolutely. Do we live in a perfect world? No. But sometimes it doesn't even matter if you're male or female. Sometimes if you have a softer voice or you don't feel like you're being heard, you have to maybe jump onto the voice that's being louder than you, that is saying what you're saying and being like, yes, absolutely. I just said that. I'm so glad you agreed so much that you repeated it.
Yeah, and there's one more important point to that, the strategy that Serena is saying, that is also very important, because the leader in the organization is the one that should be fostering these things. But if it's not, you can take an opportunity like Serena mentioned and say to the leader, oh, I think she has something to say, right? And look at the leader and point to the leader in a very nice way that he's not doing his job, right? And that is a very important thing, because, and even staying afterwards and say, hey, you know what? I know that we have a bunch of guys in the group who are like chest pumping and they love to like show that they know what they're talking about, but there's some of us who, you know, we just need the space to be able to talk. Would you mind, you know, moderating a little bit so we can get all the points across, right? This is something that is your right. So don't forget that you can actually ask for that, right? And if it doesn't work, that is the time where you have to say, I need to look for another job, because that person is not, if the leader is not changing, then you're gonna be in trouble. At the end of the day, it's just not the organization for you.
So I think we're a little bit over time, but I think it's fine. That was all important. So I think it's all right that we went a little late, but yeah, I think I'll say thank you all for coming. I think it's on Torrie for the tech side to kind of close us out. And we'll be doing these once a month. So our next one, Ben, actually, if you have information on the next couple of panels that you want to talk about.
I do, I'd be very happy to. So our next one is on September 8th, and we're going to be doing a creative leadership panel. And we have 4 panelists so far confirmed. Bill Roper, who's over at Serena's studio with AuthorDigital and Adept Games. Kelly Devine, Arif Kinchin, and Tremel Isaac. And we are currently looking for a 5th panelist as well to join them. And we have a couple of interesting people who hopefully will join us. And hopefully more dogs, because dogs are adorable. So we'll be posting more information about that panel shortly. In October on the 13th, we will be doing a production leadership panel. And then on November 10th, technology and engineering leadership. And in December, on December 8th, we'll be doing a business development leadership panel. So keep an eye on our website and our Twitter, and we will post information as that progresses. And thank you all very much.
We should also say, as one last thing, from the vote in the chat, the IGDA Foundation will be getting our donation for this panel.
Woo! So awesome. Thank you. I'm on the board for the foundation, so I'm a little biased. That was mine. And we really, really appreciate it. We're working really hard to promote diversity and inclusion in the game industry and providing opportunities for the lesser represented groups. So really, really appreciate it. We'll do so much for the foundation.
And we're going to be doing a similar donation with more nominations next time around. So we hope to see you all again.
Nice.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.